The lost letter technique. Imagine walking down a quiet street on a cold morning. The city is half awake, windows glowing faint gold, the air still carrying the echo of midnight. As you stroll, you spot something on the pavement, a single envelope slightly scuffed with a handwritten address and a real stamp. There's a strange intimacy to the moment. Someone's story, their words, their message to another soul, is lying here unguarded, exposed to the world. You pause. In that instant, no one is watching, and a simple question appears. What do? It seems trivial. A lost letter, a scrap of someone else's life. Yet, this forgotten envelope becomes a mirror, reflecting the secret machinery of conscience. You could pick it up and slip it into the nearest mailbox. Or you could walk away. Maybe, just maybe, you might even look at the name and feel something. A hesitation, a flicker of recognition or aversion. Would you treat the letter the same if it was addressed to a local charity, a university professor, a politician, or a stranger with a foreign-sounding name? This is the haunting simplicity behind the lost letter technique. A psychological experiment so quietly profound, it can expose the silent tides of morality and bias that shape our actions without us ever realizing. Developed in the 1960s by social psychologist Stanley Milgram, the lost letter technique was not flashy or aggressive. It didn't demand confession. It simply observed what happened when people stumbled upon a small, staged ethical dilemma in their everyday lives. A test so subtle that your true self would answer before your conscious mind had a chance to intervene. Milgram and his team scattered hundreds of stamped, addressed envelopes in public places across the city. Each envelope looked authentic, but the addressee was different every time. Sometimes a well-known local institution, sometimes a random name, sometimes an organization that provokes strong opinions like a civil rights group or a political party, or even an obviously foreign-sounding name that might trigger prejudice. The researchers then waited, watching which letters would be picked up and mailed, and which would simply vanish, absorbed by the indifferent flow of daily life, or perhaps discarded by an unseen hand. The results revealed something both unsettling and honest. People were far more likely to return letters addressed to individuals or organizations they felt positively about, or at least neutral. Charities, medical institutions, and respectable professions saw their mail returned with comforting regularity. But when the recipient was a marginalized group, a political opponent, or simply someone whose name sounded different, the rates of return dropped sharply. No one was forced to declare their feelings. No one was directly questioned, but their silent choices, made in the shadows of ordinary life, betrayed a social map of hidden bias. Why does this matter? Because in moments where no one is watching, our real values bleed through. You might believe yourself fair and moral, immune to prejudice, but the mind runs deeper than declarations. Social bias isn't always shouted. Sometimes it is whispered, barely heard even by the person who harbors it. The lost letter technique uncovers those whispers, the reflexive empathy or coldness that surges before conscious thought. It's morality, not as speech, but as an instinctive act, born of a lifetime's worth of silent cultural programming. Imagine the world in miniature, each lost letter a proxy for a chance to help a stranger, right a small wrong, or turn away. The envelope becomes a symbol. If you are willing to return it, your action ripples quietly, restoring a private fragment of someone else's world. If you ignore it, the silence grows, an invisible decision that accumulates with 1,000 others, shaping the moral climate of a whole society. Let's go deeper. Imagine two people. One finds a letter addressed to a local animal shelter. The other finds one addressed to a radical activist group. The first person might feel a warm, approving glow, a small good deed, a harmless gesture. The second hesitates. Maybe they disagree with the group, or maybe they simply feel uneasy. They might rationalize leaving the letter. Someone else will pick it up. Or, it's not my business. Or even, they probably don't deserve my help. Each justification, gentle or harsh, is a subtle rationalization masking a bias that might have gone unnoticed without this tiny, moral trap. Now reverse the roles. Imagine a person who has suffered from discrimination finds a letter addressed to an authority figure or an institution that once caused them pain. They may hesitate to, perhaps even leave the letter behind. The lost letter doesn't accuse, it reveals. It shows that bias and empathy are not the property of any one group, but human reactions shaped by lived experience, fear, and memory. This experiment echoes far beyond its simple surface. In our daily lives, we are constantly encountering lost letters, moments when a quiet opportunity arises to help someone, to extend trust, or to turn away. A dropped wallet, a colleague's mistake, an unknown number calling for help. The unconscious calculations we make, who is worthy, who is familiar, who is one of us, often decide what we do long before we ever form a conscious thought about fairness. The lost letter technique isn't just a clever study, it's a reminder. It tells us that our morality is not always enacted in the grand, visible acts, but in the everyday, unobserved choices that leave no record except in the private corridors of conscience. The person who picks up the letter may never tell anyone. They may not even remember the act the next day. But the sum of these invisible gestures builds the true ethical architecture of a community. And here's the most haunting part. The letters that are never returned, the stories that never reach their destination, may be lost not through malice but through the faintest, most invisible drift of unconscious bias. In the great ledger of right and wrong, sometimes what matters most is not the crimes we commit or the virtues we proclaim, but the gentle, nearly silent choices we make when no one is watching. So the next time you see a lost letter or any small opportunity to do a silent good, remember the experiment. Know that the weight of your action or inaction is not measured just by what happens to a piece of mail, but by what it reveals about the invisible forces that guide your moral life. The world is built on these quiet tests, repeated every day, everywhere. The lost letter waits for you in many forms. The bystander effect study. There is a silence in crowds that is more chilling than a scream. A silence that swallows desperate pleas, letting suffering blend with the ordinary hum of the world. The bystander effect is not just a scientific finding. It is a mirror held up to our secret frailty, our unspoken hope that someone else will take responsibility while we hide in the comfort of numbers. You may think you would never stand by and watch tragedy unfold, but history and chilling experiments reveal otherwise. It began on a cold New York night in 1964, when a woman named Kitty Genovese ran for her life beneath yellowed streetlights. She screamed for help, her voice echoing between the apartment buildings of Queens. Windows lit up. At least 38 people heard her cries. Some looked through the glass. Some shuddered and closed their blinds. But almost no one acted. Her murderer returned, undisturbed, and finished what he started. By the time someone finally called the police, it was too late. Kitty Genovese died not from a lack of help, but from an overwhelming presence of witnesses, each one waiting for another to do what needed to be done. This tragedy sent a shockwave through the public mind. How could dozens of people let such horror happen in plain sight? Psychologists John Darley and Bib Latane set out to find the answer, and in their search, they uncovered one of the most unsettling patterns of human behavior, the bystander effect. Imagine you're in a small room, filling out paperwork. Smoke suddenly seeps in under the door, curling and darkening the air. If you are alone, you will likely leap up, alarmed, and report the danger. But if 2 or 3 others are with you, calmly working, you pause. You look at their faces. If no one else seems worried, your own fear simmers down. You wait, heart pounding, for someone else to move first. This simple experiment revealed the frightening truth. The more people present, the less likely anyone is to help, even when the danger is real and urgent. The effect is not just limited to stage smoke. Darley and Latane's other studies asked participants to overhear a fake medical emergency, a seizure, a panicked voice calling for help from another room. When alone, the majority rushed to help within seconds. But as group size increased, the willingness to intervene plummeted. In groups of 6 Only a third took action, while others froze, paralyzed not by malice but by a strange psychological logic. Responsibility dissolves in the crowd, and we become spectators to suffering, convinced that action is someone else's burden. But the bystander effect is not just an academic concept. It plays out in ordinary and extraordinary ways every single day. Imagine a busy street where a man collapses, clutching his chest. Dozens pass by, some glancing, some avoiding eye contact. It is not that people are evil or indifferent. Most feel a rush of guilt, a nervous flutter in their stomachs. They tell themselves, someone else will help. Surely, someone closer, someone more qualified. The presence of others becomes an excuse, a quiet permission to do nothing. Or picture a schoolyard where a child is bullied, surrounded by classmates. The victim's cries are met with silence. Each onlooker waits, hesitates, believing that it is not their role to intervene, fearing social backlash, or just hoping to blend into the mass of silent faces. In this vacuum of action, cruelty thrives and loneliness grows sharp. There have been many tragic echoes of Kitty Genovese's fate, from urban attacks in crowded cities to public disasters where aid arrived too late. Yet the bystander effect is not just a story of an action, but a blueprint of how our minds justify it. Social psychologists have uncovered 3 core reasons we freeze in a group. First, there's the diffusion of responsibility. Each person feels less personally responsible, believing others will step up. Second, there is social influence. When we see others doing nothing, we interpret their inaction as a signal that help is not needed. Third, there is fear of judgment. Acting could make us look foolish if the emergency turns out to be harmless. Even the bravest are vulnerable. In 2009, in a bustling city square, a man named Hugo Alfredo Taliax was stabbed while trying to help a woman being assaulted. He collapsed on the sidewalk and lay bleeding for over an hour. More than 20 people walked by, some stopping to stare, some even taking photos. No one intervened until he was dead. The scene was caught on security cameras. The footage is haunting. An entire city swirling past a dying man. Each person just a fleeting blur in the record of his last moments. But the bystander effect is not inevitable. Sometimes, all it takes is one person breaking the silence for others to join. This hero effect can shatter the paralysis. When a single person steps forward, calls for help, confronts the attacker, offers a hand, the spell breaks, and suddenly, bystanders are transformed into helpers. Courage, like fear, is contagious. In 2011, in New York City subway, a man fainted and fell onto the tracks. For a moment, the crowd froze. But then one woman leapt into action, calling for help and rallying others. Instantly, the bystander wall crumbled. Multiple people rushed to pull him to safety. The difference between tragedy and rescue was the courage of a single voice. The lesson of the bystander effect is both devastating and redemptive. We are creatures of context, shaped by invisible social forces, sometimes to the point of moral blindness. But knowing this, we can defy it. The next time you witness someone in need, remember, the crowd is not a shield, but a fog. Someone else may not be coming. The world changes when you do. And in that split second, when you decide to act rather than wait, you break a spell that has haunted humanity for generations. You become the reason silence gives way to hope the moment the story takes a different turn. The bystander effect is a warning, but also an invitation, a call to be the one who answers, even when everyone else stands still. The Monster Study 1939. There are stories so unsettling, so quietly monstrous, that their ripples never stop moving through the world. This is one of them. Imagine a world where childhood innocence, already fragile, already so easily bruised, is not protected, but targeted, dissected, even shattered in the name of science. Where the wound is not physical, but invisible, cutting straight through the unseen boundaries of self-esteem, trust, and the delicate wiring of a developing mind. In 1939, in the still shadows of the University of Iowa, an experiment began. It was supposed to unlock the secrets of stuttering, a cruel mystery that silences so many voices. But what took place was an act so chilling that, decades later, it would be whispered about as the monster study. The premise was deceptively simple, but its consequences would echo across lifetimes. 24 orphaned children, children already living on the margins, already acquainted with abandonment, were split into groups. Some stuttered, some didn't. But the ones who didn't stutter were about to be given a gift they never asked for, a lifelong struggle, conjured by nothing but words. The researchers, led by Wendell Johnson and his graduate student Mary Tudor, told one group of healthy speaking children that their speech was perfectly fine. Encouragement, affirmation, safety. But to another group, children who spoke just as fluently, just as normally, they whispered a different story. They were told, again and again, that they spoke poorly, that they were broken, defective, that their voices were not to be trusted. Imagine that every stumble, every hesitation, every slip of the tongue seized upon, magnified, held up as proof of some fundamental flaw. You have a bad habit of stuttering, they were told. People will notice. You must try not to speak unless you can do it right. No blows were struck. No punishments given. Just language, turned toxic, weaponized, injected like venom into a child's unguarded psyche. What happens when authority, when the very adults you look to for guidance, tell you that your voice is wrong? For those children, reality itself began to warp. Many withdrew into silence, retreating from conversation, from laughter, from even the smallest joys of childhood. Some, who had never stuttered before, began to do so. The suggestion, just the suggestion, became a prophecy fulfilled, a self-concept rewritten. The damage was not just temporary. The wounds, for some, would never heal. There's a peculiar cruelty in this experiment, a cruelty that does not raise its voice, that does not need to, because it reveals the terrifying power of suggestion, the dark alchemy of expectation, the idea that what others believe about us, especially those we trust, can literally change the shape of our minds, the way our synapses fire, the very rhythm of our breathing. This is not just a story about stuttering. It is a story about how words can fracture identity, how a child's sense of self can be dismantled brick by brick without a single act of physical violence. We like to think of abuse as something visible, as bruises or scars. But what if the deepest harm is inflicted by something as intangible as a sentence, a phrase, a look of disapproval? Consider the orphanage. For many of these children, there was already a void, parents lost, love uncertain. The experiment did not just prey upon the vulnerability of youth. It exploited the aching emptiness of abandonment. The researchers became surrogate authorities, almost parental. When they spoke, their words weighed tenfold, etching themselves into the core of each child's identity. Decades later, survivors of the monster study would recall the devastation. Some never recovered their confidence, their trust, their willingness to risk speaking aloud. The trauma was not just the development of a stutter, but the far deeper erosion of belief in their own worth. Imagine living your entire adult life with the quiet echo of those words. You are broken. You are wrong. You should not speak. What is most chilling is how easily it happened. There was no malice, just an experiment, a hypothesis, an absence of empathy. The researchers, searching for scientific truth, forgot the deeper truth, that a child's mind is not a laboratory. That words, when spoken from a place of authority, become fate. That language is never neutral. Now imagine the countless classrooms, homes, and workplaces where similar messages are spoken, not in the name of science, but out of carelessness, impatience, or inherited prejudice. How many voices are silenced every day, not by trauma visible to the world, but by quiet, persistent suggestion? How many identities are fractured? How many dreams set aside because someone trusted says, you can't, or you shouldn't, or you'll never be good enough? The monster study was eventually condemned, its methods denounced as unethical, its name invoked as a warning to future generations of researchers. But the damage was done. The children grew up, forever changed by the experiment. The wounds were not just scientific missteps. They were lifelong tragedies, born in the private silence of each affected child. Let this story serve as a dark mirror, reflecting not only the ethical failures of the past, but the hidden violence that language can inflict. The monster study proves that you do not need cages or chains to destroy a human being. Sometimes, all it takes is a voice of authority, speaking doubt into an innocent mind, and then leaving that doubt to grow. We must remember, every word spoken to a child is an experiment in shaping reality. The consequences are never just academic. They are written on the soul, echoing long after the experiment is over. The monster study is not just history. It is a warning, a question we must ask ourselves every time we open our mouths to speak to someone who trusts us. Will my words build them, or will they break them? The false memory implant. You remember your childhood, don't you? The taste of an ice cream on a hot afternoon, the way your mother laughed, the moment you learned to ride a bike. These memories feel sacred, untouchable, as if etched into the bedrock of your mind. But what if I told you that even your most vivid memories, those precious fragments that shape your identity, could be rewritten, not erased, not faded, but replaced? What if a stranger could slip into your mind and, with a few subtle cues, plant memories of things that never happened? And you, with the deepest sincerity, would swear they were real. In the 1990s, psychologist Elizabeth Loftus set out to answer a question that should haunt us all. How easy is it to create a memory from nothing? Not just suggest an idea, but plant an entire episode into the soil of someone's past. Her experiment was simple and chilling. Volunteers were told they were participating in a study about childhood memories. Their close relatives had provided stories, most of them real, but one was a lie. Participants were told, when you were 5, you got lost in a shopping mall. You cried until a kind old man helped you find your family. At first, most insisted it never happened. But as the sessions continued, something disturbing unfolded. The false memory grew roots. Participants began to remember details, the color of the store, the feel of their mother's hand, the sound of their name echoing over the loudspeaker. This wasn't just a passing suggestion. Within days, many believed the event had truly happened. They remembered what the man looked like, what they wore that day. Some even felt the pang of old fear. Reality had been hacked. What began as a story became an experience, alive with emotion. The boundary between memory and imagination, once so clear, turned to mist. Why does this happen? Memory, we like to think, is a recording, neat, objective, reliable. But neuroscience tells us otherwise. Each time we recall a memory, we reconstruct it, piecing it together from fragments like a crime scene investigator. Every detail is filtered through who we are now, our current beliefs, our present fears. Under pressure, social, emotional, or subtle suggestion, these fragments can be rearranged, swapped out, painted over with new colors. The act of remembering is not retrieving a file. It's rewriting the story every single time. Think of how vulnerable this makes us. If a trusted figure, a parent, a therapist, a scientist, suggests a scenario from our childhood, the mind wants to please, to fill in the blanks, to make sense of uncertainty. Over time, we stitch imagination into memory. The distinction fades. The fake becomes real. Loftus' work did not stop at shopping malls. In one study, participants were told they had once spilled a punch bowl at a family wedding, ruining the party and angering the bride. Over time, many recalled the event, describing the embarrassment in vivid detail, even though it never occurred. In another, participants remembered being attacked by an animal, getting lost in the woods, or being rescued by a lifeguard. Each time, suggestion grew into conviction. The implications are terrifying. Think of eyewitness testimony in courtrooms. A witness, asked to recall a crime, might be influenced by subtle cues from lawyers or police, planting doubt, twisting certainty, forging new details. An innocent person can go to prison because of a memory that never truly happened. Families have been shattered when therapists, convinced that repressed trauma must be present, inadvertently create memories of abuse that never took place. The consequences are not theoretical. They are devastating, real, and lifelong. But the horror goes deeper. If memories can be implanted from the outside, how many of your most precious recollections are truly yours? Are you sure you remember your first day at school? Or did you absorb the story from an old photograph, a parent's tale, or a sibling's teasing? Did you truly meet that childhood friend under a summer sky? Or did you invent the detail years later, filling in the gaps with fiction? The truth is, your autobiography is a patchwork of reality and imagination, stitched together with every retelling. Consider the moral and existential vertigo of this revelation. If memory is mutable, where does that leave identity? Our sense of self is built upon stories we tell ourselves. I am this way because of what happened to me. If the past can be rewritten, even unintentionally, who are we, really? Are we the author, or just the editor of an ever-changing script? Every time you recall a heartbreak, a triumph, a betrayal, are you living truth or performing a myth you've rehearsed so many times you forgot it was fiction? Real people have suffered under the weight of false memory. Families torn apart by accusations no one can prove because the memory feels real. People have confessed to crimes they did not commit, remembering details they could not have known. Courts, therapists, and loved ones have all been swept up in the storm. And the mind, ever eager to find order in chaos, accepts the new version of history. You might think you are immune, that your memories are too vivid, too important, too personal to be corrupted. But the science says otherwise. We are all susceptible, children and adults, the gullible and the skeptical alike. Memory is not a fortress, but a living organism, shaped by every whisper and shadow. In a world of pressure, persuasion, and power, your past is never truly safe. Imagine, for a moment, a future where memory implants are not accidental, but intentional, where technology allows us to edit, delete, or overwrite our recollections at will. Would you choose to forget your greatest pain? Would you dare to remember something beautiful that never happened? Would you even know the difference? As science moves closer to this reality, the question becomes more urgent. What does it mean to be the author of your own life, if your memories can be sculpted by others? So tonight, as you lay your head down and revisit the faded images of your childhood, ask yourself, how much of it is real? How much has been quietly edited by time, by stories, by suggestion? And if the past is a story we keep rewriting, perhaps the most important truth is not what happened, but who we choose to become, knowing that memory is not a courtroom, but a canvas forever wet with the paint of possibility. The split brain revelation. You wake up every morning believing you are whole, a single, unified consciousness. You look in a mirror and see one face. You speak, and a single voice answers back. Your thoughts, your desires, your memories, they all feel as if they flow from the same source, an unbroken stream of identity. But what if that seamless self you trust is just a careful illusion, a mask of unity hiding the silent war between two minds inside your skull? This is the story of the split brain, the revelation that shattered everything we thought we knew about the mind, the self, and the fragile reality we take for granted. In the mid-20th century, neurosurgeons began performing a radical operation called corpus callosotomy, severing the thick bundle of nerves that connect the left and right hemispheres of the brain. This procedure was a desperate measure to treat the agony of intractable epilepsy, disabling the electrical storm that raged across the hemispheres. Patients survived, their seizures calmed, and on the surface, they seemed unchanged, able to walk, talk, and live ordinary lives. But when scientists peered deeper, the mask of unity slipped. Imagine sitting in a quiet lab, staring at a screen. A word, say, apple, flashes to your right visual field, and you easily say the word aloud. But now, the same word appears in your left visual field. Your lips hesitate. No sound emerges. You know nothing has changed in the world outside. But inside, your brain is divided. The right hemisphere sees the word but cannot speak. The left hemisphere, master of language, is now blind to half the world. It is as if your mind has split into two silent strangers, living side by side, sharing one body, but no longer able to communicate. Researchers began to test these patients, quietly unraveling the seams of the self. If the left hand is guided by the right hemisphere, it can draw or select objects the patient cannot name or even recognize with words. You show a split-brain patient a picture of a snow scene to the right hemisphere and a chicken claw to the left. Ask the patient to pick related images with each hand, and the left picks a chicken, the right is snow shovel. But when you ask the patient to explain why, their speaking mind invents a story, a rationalization. Oh, the chicken claw goes with the chicken, and you need a shovel to clean out the chicken shed. The left hemisphere, clueless to the real reason, weaves a fable, filling the gap with confident lies. The two minds are living parallel lives, but only one gets to tell the story. This is the unsettling revelation. The self you trust is not a singular authority. Your brain is a committee, sometimes harmonious, sometimes at odds, always negotiating. In split-brain patients, the negotiations break down and the separate voices emerge. But what about the rest of us, whose corpus callosum is still intact? Are we truly unified, or just better at hiding our inner contradictions? Think of the moments you feel torn, when a part of you wants to do something while another part resists. Craving and discipline, anger and reason, memory and forgetfulness. The split brain experiments reveal that this inner conflict is not metaphorical. It is physical, real, rooted in the neural wiring of your most private self. You're not one mind, but two, and perhaps more, each with its own agenda, memories, and even its own sense of reality. The left hemisphere is analytical, verbal, a relentless storyteller. It crafts explanations, sometimes with no evidence, sometimes in direct contradiction to the facts. The right hemisphere is holistic, intuitive, the silent witness, able to see what the left cannot, able to feel what cannot be spoken. When the bridge between them is cut, the illusions shatter. When the bridge is intact, they still whisper, debate, and sometimes deceive. Consider a woman whose left hand begins to act against her will, buttoning a shirt her right hand tries to unbutton, or snatching objects away as her other hand reaches for them. She is not possessed, nor insane. The warring hands are evidence of the hidden split, the duality at the heart of every human mind. Her story is not an anomaly. It is a glimpse behind the curtain at the secret dialogue always running beneath the surface. The split brain studies are not just about rare patients or surgical curiosities. They are a mirror held up to every one of us. What does it mean to be a self when the brain can be divided and each half can operate independently, each convinced of its own reality? What if the sense of wholeness is just the winner's story, told by whichever hemisphere happens to control the mouth at that moment? Scientists asked a split-brain patient to follow commands given only to one side of the brain. The right hemisphere, for example, was told to stand up. The patient stands. When asked why, the left hemisphere, unaware of the command, confidently replies, "Oh, I needed to stretch." The mind fills gaps, invents causes, and constructs meaning, even when reality is fractured. So the next time you feel certain of yourself, your memories, your motives, your story, pause for a moment. Remember the split brain. Remember that you are a house with many rooms, and sometimes the doors are closed. Your mind may hide truths from itself, not out of malice, but because it cannot do otherwise. The left and right hemispheres, these ancient rivals and partners, weave your reality moment by moment, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in secret rebellion. You're not the singular, sovereign self you imagine. You are a chorus, a contradiction, a meeting place for many voices, some speaking, some silent, all shaping the story you call me. And when the bridges are cut, the truth emerges, raw, and unsettling. Even your own mind may be hiding from itself, constructing a reality that is always, forever, split. The mirror test for consciousness. In a silent laboratory, under the cold, white hum of lights, a scientist holds her breath as she watches an animal meet itself for the first time. The room is simple, almost empty, just a mirror, a curious creature, and the invisible weight of one of philosophy's oldest questions. Who, if anyone, truly knows they exist? The mirror test, invented in the 1970s by psychologist Gordon Gallup Jr., seems almost deceptively simple. Place a mark, an odorless, touchless spot, on an animal in a place it can't see without a reflection. Introduce the animal to a mirror. Watch and wait. If the animal notices the mark in the mirror and then touches or examines its own body where the mark is, this is more than just curiosity. This is the ghostly birth of self-recognition, a flicker of self-awareness, a possible window into consciousness itself. But why does this matter? Because for centuries, humans believed self-awareness was our exclusive realm, the private chamber that made us unique in the animal kingdom. We're the storytellers, the thinkers, the dreamers who ask, who am I, and what am I doing here? The mirror test dares to crack that certainty. It asks, is anyone else anywhere on this earth also looking back at themselves and realizing that is me? Most animals fail the test in ways that are oddly haunting. Dogs, so emotionally expressive, bark at the reflection, sniff around the edges, or lose interest as if the mirror is a portal with no meaning. Cats, elegant and mysterious, may arch and paw, but soon turn away, unimpressed or perhaps unsettled. The world of the mirror, for them, is not a window to self. It is a hollow echo. But sometimes the ordinary shatters. In a quiet room, a chimpanzee catches sight of itself. At first, there is confusion, startled looks, posturing, aggression. The reflection mimics every move, every twitch, every silent scream. But then the posture softens. The animal begins to experiment. It opens its mouth, sticks out its tongue, touches the mark on its forehead, watches its own fingers move. And then, with the gentlest wonder, a realization dawns. This is me. It is a moment at once subtle and seismic. The barrier between self and world, so thick for most creatures, thins for an instant. The chimp does not simply react to a rival or a stranger, but begins to investigate the self as an object, separate, yet real. This is the mirror test. This is self-awareness in its raw, embryonic form. The implications ripple out in every direction. Elephants, giants of memory and mourning, have passed the test, raising trunks to painted foreheads, exploring the marks with deliberate, searching movements. Dolphins, swimming in the endless blue, twist and spin before mirrors, inspecting their bodies with playful curiosity, using the reflection to examine themselves in ways no wild sea has ever shown them. Even magpies, small birds, minds sharp as razors, have shown glimmers of recognition, pecking at colored stickers on their feathers while staring intently at their own images. Each of these moments is a crack in the old story that humans alone are self-aware. It is as if the world is full of secret mirrors, and every now and then, a creature stumbles into one and glimpses the shadowy outline of its own existence. But the mirror test is also controversial. Passing it doesn't mean an animal has the full spectrum of human-like consciousness. Failing it doesn't mean an animal is just a machine blind to its own being. The test is both a doorway and a boundary, a question written in silver glass. Think for a moment what it means to recognize yourself. You see your own eyes. You know your own face. You remember your own life. This is the foundation of identity, the anchor of every memory, every hope, every fear. In the wild, what evolutionary purpose could this serve? For primates, it may have begun as a way to distinguish allies from enemies, to care for wounds, to read social cues in the faces of others. For elephants, whose societies are built on complex bonds and rituals, Perhaps it is the root of empathy, the ability to imagine the suffering of another, because you have glimpsed yourself as a being who can suffer. And yet, self-awareness is not all comfort. To know you exist is to know you can end. Awareness brings the seeds of fear, of longing, of existential loneliness. In the eyes of a dolphin, in the mournful stillness of an elephant beside a lost companion, perhaps we see not just intelligence, but the first tremors of existential thought, the beginning of questions no animal can answer, and yet somehow must feel. The mirror test isn't perfect. Some animals may sense themselves without using sight, through smell, sound, or touch. Others may simply not care about visual marks or mirrors. Their world is written in scent trails, magnetic fields, or vibrations beyond our perception. So a negative result doesn't prove a lack of consciousness. It merely means that the test, a product of human senses and expectations, does not reach them in their own language. But for those who do pass, the consequences are profound. The great apes, elephants, dolphins, certain birds, they all share with us the rare burden of self-recognition. They're not just acting out programs, but maybe watching themselves act, sometimes questioning, sometimes grieving, sometimes even playing with their own image. The question burns. If they can see themselves, do they also dream? Do they imagine alternate lives, regret mistakes, hope for things to come? Science cannot say for certain, but the glimmer is there in every curious glance, every hesitant touch of the mark, every long, searching look into their own eyes. Think of yourself as a child, meeting your reflection for the first time. There is confusion, then laughter, then, perhaps, a sudden jolt of understanding. That's me. It's a revelation so simple, yet so shattering. It marks the beginning of memory, of story, of everything we call I. The mirror test, then, is not just about animals. It is a question aimed at the heart of consciousness itself. Where does the self begin? Who, in this vast, dreaming world, truly knows they exist? The answer is not final, not simple, not limited to us. The silvered glass remains, waiting for another hand, another eye, another mind to meet itself in wonder, and in that fleeting recognition to say, if not in words, then in being I am. The smoke-filled room. You are sitting in a small, quiet room. The air is still, humming with fluorescent light. You fill out a dull survey, listening to the soft scratch of your pen against the paper. Everything feels routine, predictable, safe. But then, without warning, a thin curl of smoke seeps under the door. At first it is faint, just a ghostly finger drifting across the carpet. Then more comes, wispy, insistent, growing, starting to cloud the air. The bitter scent creeps into your nose. Something, somewhere, is burning. The part of your brain wired for danger jolts awake, raising every primitive alarm. And yet you glance around. No one else seems worried. Their faces remain calm, almost bored, eyes down on their papers. No one moves, no one speaks. Their serenity is contagious. Against all instinct, you stay where you are. This is not a thought experiment or a scene from a movie. It is an experiment that exposed the deepest fractures in our sense of independence. A demonstration that our will to survive can be quietly, invisibly, overruled by the urge to conform. In 1968, psychologists John Darley and Bib Latané designed an experiment so simple and so cruelly revealing. Its results still unsettle us today. Volunteers were invited, one at a time, to participate in what they thought was a survey about urban life. The real study, however, would begin only after the door closed behind them. Hidden in the walls was a mechanism to release harmless smoke, white, pungent, dense enough to be unmistakable. For some participants, the experience was solitary. Alone in the room, they would see the smoke, their senses screaming danger. Almost every person alone responded quickly, standing up, alerting staff, sometimes even rushing out in fear. The body's ancient reflexes took over. Fight, flee, survive. But in other trials, volunteers were not alone. They were placed in a room with 2 or 3 others, people who, unknown to the true subject, were actors instructed to ignore the smoke, to remain unmoved no matter how thick the cloud grew. This is when the strangest thing happened. The smoke crept higher, sometimes blurring vision, sometimes burning eyes. Yet the real participant, surrounded by others doing nothing, also did nothing. Some shifted uncomfortably, glanced at the silent faces, coughed softly, but almost nobody sounded the alarm. Minutes ticked by. The air grew dangerous, vision blurred, and yet the need to fit in, to avoid breaking the unwritten social script, overwhelmed the most basic drive to survive. When the experiment was over and the door finally opened, researchers would ask the participant why they hadn't reacted. The answers were eerily similar. I thought maybe it was nothing. No one else seemed worried, so I figured it wasn't a big deal. I didn't want to embarrass myself. In that smoke-filled room, evolution's oldest alarm bell, danger, run, had lost a battle against the modern mind's need for social approval. What is this force so strong it can drown out the raw panic of suffocation? Psychologists call it conformity, a deeply embedded instinct to take our cues from those around us, especially in uncertain situations. It's the reason we laugh when others laugh, why we feel uncomfortable when everyone else is silent, why a crowd staring at the sky can make you look up, too, even if you have no idea why. We are social animals, but more than that, we are imitators, always scanning the crowd for the rules that will keep us accepted. In the smoke-filled room, conformity is not a gentle urge, but a suffocating command. Even as the air becomes unbreathable, the fear of standing out, of being the one who panics, holds us in our seats. It is easy to say, I would get up, I would save myself. But the numbers don't lie. Alone, 75% of people report the smoke within minutes. With others present who ignore it, less than 10% react at all, even as the smoke thickens to a choking haze. This experiment is not just a curiosity. It is a reflection of everyday life, sometimes with consequences far beyond embarrassment. Consider disasters in crowded spaces, fires in public buildings, accidents on busy streets. Time and again, people have hesitated, lost in the gravity of inaction, looking to others for a cue that never comes. In some of the most tragic events in modern history, lives were lost not because danger was invisible, but because no one wanted to be the first to break the silence, the first to shout fire, the first to be seen as afraid. The smoke-filled room reveals something profoundly uncomfortable about our nature. In the right circumstances, the pressure to conform can silence reason, intuition, and even the instinct to survive. We become prisoners of our own need to blend in, entrusting our safety to the group, even when the group is leading us straight into danger. And yet, knowing this is the first step to escaping it. The experiment shows that a single voice, one person willing to question, to stand up, to break the spell, can change the script for everyone. When one person in the room reacts, the others are far more likely to follow. Courage, too, is contagious. The difference between paralysis and rescue is not knowledge or strength, but the willingness to risk standing out. Think back to the last time you noticed something strange, felt a surge of worry, but looked around and saw only calm faces. Did you trust your senses, or did you bury that feeling, waiting for someone else to validate your fear? The smoke-filled room is everywhere, on the subway, in the office, in families, online. The lesson is stark. You are not immune. None of us are, but you can break the cycle. You can be the one who stands up, who calls for help, who says what others are afraid to voice. In a world so often filled with silent rooms and invisible smoke, that act is not just courage, it is survival. And sometimes it is the difference between tragedy and salvation. In the end, the real fire is not outside us, but within, a test of whether we will wait for permission to live or trust ourselves enough to do what must be done, even if we do it alone. The Robber's Cave experiment. There's a darkness that lives just beneath the surface of human nature, a readiness to divide, to distrust, to draw lines between us and them. It can begin so simply, so quietly. A glance, a word, a sense of belonging, sharpened by the presence of outsiders. But in the summer of 1954, inside a seemingly ordinary camp in the wilds of Oklahoma, this darkness was not just observed. It was manufactured, studied, and ultimately, very nearly, unleashed beyond control. This is the story of the Robbers Cave experiment, a real-life Lord of the Flies, orchestrated by grown men in the name of science. Its lessons are hauntingly clear. Hate is not an accident of the human heart. It is a construction, a process. And peace, true peace, rarely emerges on its own. It must be designed, engineered, fought for, and sometimes salvaged at the very last moment. It began with 2 busloads of boys, each 11 or 12, full of summer's wild energy and expectation. They thought they were coming to camp for adventure, hiking, swimming, the simple joy of new friends and fresh air. They had no idea they were about to become the subjects of an experiment in group psychology, one that would change the understanding of conflict forever. The boys were divided, at first without their knowledge, into 2 isolated groups. Each group was carefully kept apart, living in different parts of the park, forming their own little worlds. They chose names, the Eagles and the Rattlers. They made flags and chants, forged identities in the crucible of separation. Within days, bonds deepened, hierarchies emerged, pride bloomed. The Eagles versus the Rattlers. Us versus them. And then, the stage was set for the next act. The researchers, led by Muzaffar Sharif, quietly escalated the stakes. The groups were introduced. Suddenly, their private paradise was shared with rivals. The boys were thrown into fierce competitions, tug-of-war, baseball, treasure hunts, with prizes for the winners and nothing for the losers. The spirit of camp turned, almost overnight, into the spirit of war. What followed was not just rivalry, but escalation. Tensions mounted quickly. Cheating accusations flew. The Eagles raided the Rattlers' cabin, tearing down their flag, gloating over their victories. The Rattlers retaliated by ransacking the Eagles' belongings, stealing and vandalizing what they could. Insults became weapons. Rocks were thrown. Food fights erupted in the mess hall. Hate grew, not as an accident, but as a consequence of engineered scarcity and competition. Listen closely, and you can almost hear the echoes of this dynamic across human history, across nations, neighborhoods, and families. When resources are limited, when outsiders are introduced, when victory for one side means loss for the other, the story is always the same, us against them. But the true horror, the real genius of the Robbers Cave experiment, was what it revealed about the fragility of peace. For when the researchers tried to simply bring the boys together, to urge them to get along, it did not work. Shared meals and casual meetings only hardened the divisions, turning awkward silence into renewed hostility. Good intentions were powerless against the momentum of hate. It was only when the researchers created real, meaningful problems that could not be solved unless the groups cooperated. A broken-down truck that needed every boy's help to start, a clogged water supply requiring joint effort, that the walls began to crumble. Necessity forced collaboration. Achievements were shared. Slowly, grudgingly, the boys began to see each other as human, not just as enemies. By the end of camp, something remarkable had happened. The boys, once bitter foes, began to share chores, money, and stories. They left together on the same bus, singing the same songs. But the lesson was painfully clear. It was not goodwill, not lectures, not forced proximity that brought peace. It was the pressure of shared purpose, the discovery that what divides us can only be undone by something we need so badly. We cannot do it alone. Consider the implications. If hate can be created so easily, by dividing, by naming, by competing, then perhaps is always waiting for a spark. And if peace requires engineering, if it needs obstacles and goals that transcend our differences, then perhaps conflict is not the exception, but the default setting of the human heart. The Robbers Cave experiment did not end in tragedy, but in revelation. It exposed not only the machinery of conflict, but the blueprint for reconciliation. It also offered a warning. The lines we draw are dangerous things. The rituals we create to mark difference. Team colors, slogans, flags have power. Left unchecked, they become weapons. But if we design our lives so that we must depend on each other, if we find purposes larger than our tribes, there's hope. The boundaries can blur, and the old enemies can become friends. This experiment, decades later, remains a cautionary tale, but also a roadmap. The world is full of eagles and rattlers, groups, nations, factions vying for victory, believing their cause is righteous, their opponents unworthy. The temptation to hate, to divide, to hoard what is ours is always close. But the possibility for peace is never far, if we are willing to build it brick by brick together. So the next time you feel the pull of division, remember the boys of Robbers Cave. Remember how quickly we can be turned against each other, and how deliberately we must work to find common ground. The darkness beneath the surface is real, but so is the light that emerges when we reach across the line and live together. In the end, the experiment's final, unspoken lesson is this: human nature is not fixed. What we build, hate or peace, is always, in the end, our own creation. The Stanford prison simulation. You walk into a basement, fluorescent lights humming, the smell of disinfectant thick in the air. You're not a prisoner. You're not a guard. You're a volunteer, a college student, stepping into a role for a paid experiment. The door locks behind you. Somewhere, in the dust and echo of that moment, your old self, your sense of right and wrong, begins to dissolve. In the summer of 1971, the basement of Stanford University's psychology building became something else. A crucible, a pressure cooker, a stage for one of the most infamous experiments in human history. Dr. Philip Zimbardo and his team wanted to see what would happen if ordinary people were asked to play prison guards and prisoners. 24 healthy, intelligent students were chosen. By a flip of a coin, half would wear khaki uniforms and mirrored sunglasses. The rest, shapeless smocks and stocking caps. The experiment was supposed to last 2 weeks. It barely survived 6 days. At first, it was all theater, laughter and awkwardness, a sense of unreality. But the moment the guards put on those uniforms, something subtle began to shift. The sunglasses made their eyes invisible. The uniforms gave them permission, an armor of authority. As they barked orders and forced prisoners to perform push-ups, the line between play and power blurred. The rules changed the air itself. The prisoners, once fellow classmates, became numbers, stripped of names and dignity. "You are prisoner 8612, the guards intoned, and the number echoed in the sterile halls, carving away identity 1 digit at a time. It escalated quickly. The guards created punishments for minor infractions, sleep deprivation, solitary confinement, humiliation rituals. One by one, prisoners broke down. They pleaded for release. Some rebelled. Others fell into stunned silence, their eyes hollow. One, prisoner 819, was so traumatized he sobbed uncontrollably, clinging to the belief that he was truly a criminal. Zimbardo, who had become superintendent, watched as the walls of the simulation thickened into reality. Outside, the world was summer and sunlight. Inside, it was always night. The experimenters watched as the guards began to compete for cruelty, inventing new ways to degrade. They forced prisoners to clean toilets with their bare hands, to simulate sex acts, to endure endless roll calls in the dead of night. And yet, these were not monsters. They were students who, days before, would have offered each other a seat in the dining hall. What happens to the soul when given a mask and power? The Stanford prison simulation showed that the boundary between good and evil is terrifyingly thin. It is not about who we are, but who we are allowed to become. Role play, it turns out, is not just a game. It is a corridor to darkness, if the script permits it. Prisoner 8612 tried to lead a rebellion. His mind fractured. He was released after begging. "You can't leave. You can't quit." The guards laughed. One told him he could only leave if he acted crazy. The line between reality and role play had vanished. Zimbardo himself, playing the warden, failed to intervene. It was not until an outsider, Christina Maslach, visited and recoiled in horror that the simulation ended. Only then did the mask come off and the sunlight return. The students stumbled out, guards and prisoners alike, changed, haunted by what they had become. What does this say about us? That kindness is skin deep. That authority corrupts faster than we dare admit. The answer is not comforting. The Stanford prison experiment proved that when identity collapses under the weight of a role, cruelty can wear any uniform. The power to harm does not come from monsters, but from masks and scripts. Ordinary people, given permission. Imagine yourself there, wearing those mirror glasses, hearing your own voice bark commands you'd never dream of uttering. Would you stop? Would you speak out? Or would the script drag you along, deeper into the role, until the real you faded into shadow? The question is not theoretical. Every day, in offices, in schools, in governments, uniforms are donned and power is granted. The echoes of Stanford's basement reverberate through every institution where authority meets vulnerability. Decades later, Zimbardo himself would struggle with what he had unleashed. He admitted that he too was swept up, that he forgot to be human. The guard apologized, many haunted for life by the memory of what they did. The prisoners, for days and weeks after, still answered to their numbers, their dreams infected by the echo of commands. There is a lesson here, chilling in its simplicity. Given the right script, any one of us can become the villain in someone else's nightmare. The uniforms do not create cruelty, they permit it. The collapse of identity is not just a danger, it is a warning. The line between I could never and I did is thinner than you think. So next time you put on a uniform, step into a role, remember what happened in that basement. Remember how quickly laughter can become orders, how a game can become a prison, how the power to define another person's reality can twist even the kindest soul. In the end, the Stanford prison simulation is not about the evil of others. It is about the fragile, flickering light inside us all, and how easily it can be extinguished by a costume, a command, or a locked door. The Milgram shock machine. Imagine you walk down a corridor in a Yale basement. The walls are drab, the air is stale, and every step echoes with a kind of institutional authority. You are here, you believe, to participate in a simple experiment about learning and memory. You are introduced to another volunteer, a gentle, polite man, chosen seemingly at random to be the learner, while you, by nothing but chance, are the teacher. A man in a crisp white lab coat, calm and composed, tells you the rules. Your job is to read word pairs and deliver electric shocks every time the learner makes a mistake. The shocks start mild. They get stronger with every wrong answer. The purpose, you're told, is to study how punishment affects learning. You sit in front of a gleaming shock generator, a row of levers labeled from 15 volts to 450 volts, each switch marked with increasingly ominous warnings. Slight shock, moderate shock, danger, severe shock, XXX. On the other side of the glass, you see the learner strapped into a chair, electrodes attached to his arms. You test the equipment. The machine is real. The pain, you are assured, is real. The scientist urges you to begin. The first wrong answer. You flip the switch. A faint buzz, a soft grunt from the learner. You wince, but the man in the lab coat, calm, rational, always polite, simply says, "Please continue." You ask, "Shouldn't we stop?" He replies, "The experiment requires that you continue." The shocks grow stronger. The learner pleads, his voice trembling. "Ow, that really hurts." He begs you to stop. At 150 volts, he demands release. At 270 volts, his screams become agonized, raw, desperate. The scientist's response never changes. "Please continue." Your hands tremble. You sweat. You laugh nervously. You try to quit. But the man in the lab coat repeats with perfect composure, "It is essential that you continue." You look for someone to rescue you from this nightmare, but no one intervenes. The shock machine hums, the levers glow, and the authority in the room grows heavier with every second. You flip another switch, and another. The learner falls silent, no longer responding. He may be unconscious, you say. The scientist, without raising his voice, simply instructs you to proceed. This is the Milgram experiment. And the chilling truth is this. Most people, ordinary people, just like you, continue to administer shocks, up to the highest level, to the brink of what they believed was fatal harm. 2 out of 3 subjects obeyed to the very end, delivering the final lethal shock because an authority figure told them to do so. Some cried, some pleaded, some sweated and shook with guilt and fear. But almost all of them complied. The experiment was not about sadism. The teacher did not want to inflict pain. The learner was in reality an actor, never truly shocked. The real subject was obedience. How far would you go when an authority told you to hurt someone else? How much of your conscience can be outsourced, handed over to a white coat, a commanding voice, a system you trust? The answers shook the world. It is easy to imagine that cruelty belongs to monsters, psychopaths, tyrants, the inhuman other. But Milgram's machine revealed a darker, more uncomfortable truth. The line between good and evil does not run through nations or ideologies, but through the hearts of ordinary men and women. It takes surprisingly little to turn someone into an executioner with a clean conscience, as long as they believe they are merely following orders. The greatest atrocities of history, the camps, the purges, the massacres, were built not by devils, but by people in rooms like this one, following instructions, compartmentalizing their guilt, convinced they bore no responsibility. Milgram's volunteers invented justifications. He told me to do it. I was just the instrument. It's not my fault. The shock machine became a symbol, a mechanical altar where morality is surrendered, responsibility diffused, and conscience anesthetized. And the truly terrifying part is not that obedience exists, but that it feels so ordinary. The authority is polite, the language is neutral, the violence is procedural. At the end, many participants asked, was he okay? Some wept with relief when they learned the truth. Some are shaken for years. Consider what this means for your own life. How many times have you obeyed orders that conflicted with your gut? How often have you silenced doubt because a teacher, a boss, a leader assured you it was necessary, required, normal? The world is full of invisible shock machines, systems and hierarchies that reward compliance, punish resistance, and slowly erode our sense of individual responsibility. It's easy to say you would never become a silent executioner, but authority does not ask for monsters. It asks for ordinary people, convinced their actions are justified by the greater good. Milgram's experiment is not just history. It is a mirror, a warning, and a question. When faced with authority, will you recognize the weight of your own choices? Or will you reach for the next lever, comforted by the knowledge that someone else is in charge? The shock machine hums on, somewhere, even now, waiting for another hand to take its place, another conscience to go quiet, another voice to say, please continue. And in that moment, the true danger is not in the machine, but in the silence that follows. The rope pull illusion. There's a peculiar silence in the moment before a test of strength, a hush that settles over a gymnasium, a schoolyard, a field where people gather, their hands pressed to a thick, heavy rope. In that charged pause, every individual feels the potential of their own power. When you are alone on that rope, you know the outcome rests entirely on you. The muscles tense. The mind focuses. There is no place to hide, no shadow to slip into. You pull with everything you have because all the weight is yours. But then the rules shift. More hands join the rope. More bodies line up beside you. More eyes glance left and right. The challenge is no longer solitary. The responsibility is diluted, smeared thin across the team. The signal is given. The rope tenses, bodies lean back. And in that instant, something strange and subtle flickers beneath the surface of human nature. The weight, once so heavy and immediate, now seems lighter. Not because the task is easier, but because the urge to give everything quietly evaporates. The collective effort, meant to multiply strength, somehow makes each person's contribution dissolve in the crowd. This is the rope pull illusion, a psychological mystery first unspooled more than a century ago by the French engineer Max Ringelmann. In his experiments, he measured how much force a single person could exert pulling on a rope, and then compared it to what happened when they were joined by others. The result was as unnerving as it was consistent. The more people on the rope, the less effort each one gave. Not in total, but per person, an invisible hand reaching in and siphoning away their will. On teams of 8, the average individual's effort dropped by nearly half. What should have been a triumph of teamwork became a quiet erosion of individual drive. Why? What is it about a group that changes us so fundamentally? Some say it's the diffusion of responsibility, the sense that someone else will pick up the slack, that our own piece is too small to matter. Others call it social loafing, a kind of unconscious withdrawal, a silent permission to relax because the group's effort will cover your retreat. It's a form of camouflage, not of the body, but of the will. When all pull together, the shadow of shared responsibility grows so large that each individual effort can slip inside and disappear. You've seen it, haven't you? Not just on the playground or in the gym, but everywhere human beings gather. In classrooms, group projects sputter as the motivated students quietly shoulder the work, while others fade into the background, their presence enough to claim the reward, their absence unnoticed. In offices, committees meet and plans are drafted, but the real progress comes from a handful who refuse to be carried. Even in moments of crisis, a car stuck on a snowy road, a stranger calling for help, the more bystanders, the less likely anyone is to step forward. The rope pull illusion follows us everywhere, eroding our impulse to act. But the illusion does more than weaken us. It reveals the fault lines of our character, the edges of our empathy and our pride. There is a deep, almost primal comfort in fading into the crowd, letting others carry what we could have lifted. It's a survival instinct, a way to conserve energy, avoid blame, evade risk. But over time, it breeds mediocrity, resentment, and the slow death of ambition. Teams that fall under its spell become hollow. They survive, but they do not excel. Yet there are rare, electric moments when the spell breaks. When leaders rise, not to command, but to inspire. When teammates look each other in the eye and silently pledge to give their best. Not because they must, but because they choose to. In these moments, the rope pull illusion collapses. The group becomes more than the sum of its parts, a living engine of shared purpose, each person pulling not just for the team, but for the honor of their own effort. The lesson is both harsh and hopeful. Most of the time, our effort dies in the shadow of shared responsibility. But we are not condemned to mediocrity. Awareness is the beginning of change. If you recognize the pull of the illusion, the urge to relax, to blend in, to hide, you can resist it. You can pull harder, not because anyone will notice, but because you know that the weight of your effort, invisible or not, always matters. The rope remembers. So the next time you find yourself among many, whether in work or play, crisis or calm, pause and ask, are you giving everything, or are you letting the rope slip quietly through your hands, waiting for someone else to carry the load? In that small, defiant act, the choice to pull with all your might even when no one is watching, you reclaim your power from the shadows and remind the world and yourself what one person can do. The invisible gorilla test. There are truths so obvious, so large, so undeniable that you'd swear you could never miss them. You trust your senses. You trust your attention. The world feels real, continuous, reliable. But what if all of that is an illusion? What if you could stare straight at the extraordinary and see nothing at all? In a small psychology lab, 2 researchers set out to challenge the very core of human awareness. They wanted to show us that what we see is not the world itself, but a tiny slice, a spotlight slicing through darkness. And in that darkness, anything can hide, even a gorilla. The experiment was simple, almost laughable in its design. Volunteers watched a short video of 2 basketball teams passing balls, dressed in white and black shirts. The task: Count how many times the players in white pass the ball. The subjects, determined to do well, lock their eyes on the ball, tracking every pass, every bounce, every pivot. Their focus narrowed to a tunnel, as the world outside that narrow mission faded away. And then, in the middle of this everyday scene, something absurd happened. A person in a full gorilla suit sauntered through the players. The gorilla paused, thumped its chest, and walked out the other side. The moment lasted 9 seconds, long enough for anyone to see. Or so you'd think. When the video stopped, the researchers turned to the participants and asked, "Did you see the gorilla?" Almost half said no, their faces twisted in confusion and disbelief. How could you not see a gorilla in a basketball game? It was impossible, except it wasn't. Again and again, in experiment after experiment, the result was the same. People missed what was right before their eyes. They were not lying. They were not inattentive. They were simply human. This is not a story about a funny costume or a clever trick. It is a revelation, a glimpse into the terrifying limitations of human attention. The phenomenon has a name: inattentional blindness. It means that when you focus intensely on one thing, you become blind to everything else. Your eyes may be open, your mind may be sharp, but your awareness is a tunnel, a spotlight that lights up one small patch, leaving the rest in shadow. Think about how this plays out beyond the lab. You drive the same road every day, eyes scanning for traffic, but fail to notice a child stepping into the street. You stare at your phone in a crowded station and miss the stranger in distress right beside you. You live your life locked in routines, focused on deadlines and small goals, as the most vital truths. Changes in your health, shifts in your relationships, cries for help from those you love, walk right through your field of view, utterly unseen. The invisible gorilla test is not just about what you miss. It is about how sure you are that you could never miss it. After the experiment, people laughed nervously, unable to believe their own minds could be so blind. But the tape does not lie. When shown the video again, the gorilla is obvious, ridiculous, impossible to ignore. And yet, they missed it. We all do. This blindness is not a flaw. It is a feature carved by evolution. The mind filters the infinite world, choosing what matters and what is not. If you saw everything, you'd be overwhelmed, paralyzed by the noise of existence. So your mind edits, slices, deletes, often without your permission. But that filter can betray you. What you do not expect, you do not see. What you're not looking for might as well not exist. The lesson is chilling, but it is also freeing. It means that your certainty, your confidence in your own perception, is an illusion. It invites humility. It means that, even now, your life might contain invisible gorillas, signals, dangers, opportunities, or secrets hiding in plain sight. It means that truth can walk right past you, unrecognized, while your focus is elsewhere. The world is not as you see it. It is stranger, richer, and more hidden than you can ever imagine. Your attention is a gift, but also a prison. The more tightly you hold it, the more you miss. So the next time you feel certain, the next time you are sure that nothing extraordinary could happen right in front of you, remember the invisible gorilla. Remember that your attention is not a window, it's a tunnel. And sometimes, what matters most is not what you're looking at, but what you never even notice. Let the memory haunt you. Let humble you. Because in the space outside your focus, the world's secrets walk on, unseen, unacknowledged, and sometimes all too real. The Pygmalion classroom effect. What if the greatest force shaping your destiny wasn't your talent, your effort, or even your circumstances, but simply the beliefs of someone watching you from across the room? What if the most invisible hand sculpting your future was not fate or luck, but the silent, almost unconscious expectations of a single authority figure? This is not fantasy, not a fairy tale. It is the true story behind the Pygmalion classroom effect, a revelation that has haunted the world of education ever since. It begins with a classroom, dusty sunlight streaming across scratched wooden desks, the shuffle and hum of young minds at work. The students are ordinary, unremarkable on paper. They come from all walks of life, some quiet, some brash, some barely noticed at all. Each of them carries their own hidden story, their own quiet hope of being seen, being chosen, being believed in. Most have no idea that, at this very moment, their future is about to be rewritten, not by their actions, but by a simple idea planted in the mind of their teacher. In 1964, two researchers, Robert Rosenthal and Lenore Jacobson, walked into an elementary school with a question so subversive it bordered on dangerous. What happens when you tell teachers that certain students are destined to bloom, to suddenly flourish in the months ahead? What happens if you do not choose the so-called gifted based on talent or ability, but at random, names pulled from a hat, futures conjured out of thin air? The teachers believed the ruse. They were told, confidentially, that a select few of their students had shown signs of extraordinary potential, hidden geniuses ready to burst forth, if only given the right encouragement. The names were random, but the expectations became real. And so, quietly, almost imperceptibly, the experiment began. At first, nothing seemed to change. The children came and went, day after day, voices rising and falling like any other year. But beneath the surface, something was shifting. The chosen ones, those marked for greatness, began to receive subtle signals from their teachers. A longer pause after a wrong answer. A gentle nod, a reassuring smile. Slightly more time spent at their desks. A word of encouragement, a question phrased with hope instead of doubt. The invisible weight of belief began to settle on their shoulders, not as a burden, but as a set of wings. And slowly, the prophecy began to fulfill itself. The chosen students, picked at random, remember, started to outpace their peers. Their test scores climbed. Their confidence grew. They became more curious, more willing to take risks, to raise their hands, to stretch into the unknown. All because someone they trusted had started to believe in them, even if only by accident. The rest of the class noticed too, though they might never have put it into words. The air shifted. The light seemed to linger a little longer on the so-called gifted. For some, it was inspiration, a rising tide lifting all boats. For others, it was a quiet suffocation. The belief in their potential faded, replaced by the soft but persistent suspicion that perhaps they were meant to be average, invisible, left behind. This is the dark side of the Pygmalion effect. It does not only reveal the power of positive expectation, it exposes the dangers of neglect, the subtle cruelty of doubt. Just as belief can sculpt greatness, disbelief can quietly erase it before it ever takes shape. The message is not always spoken aloud. It lives in micro-expressions, in impatience, in the way a teacher calls on some students, but not others. It is a story of every child who sat in the back row and wondered why the world looked past them. Years later, Rosenthal's findings would send shockwaves through the worlds of psychology, education, and beyond. The data was clear. Students randomly labeled as bloomers showed greater intellectual gains than their peers. The mere expectation of success became a self-fulfilling prophecy. Teachers' beliefs, conscious or not, had rewritten reality. But the Pygmalion classroom effect is not just a scientific curiosity. It is a mirror held up to every parent, every boss, every friend, every stranger who has ever made a silent judgment about what another person can become. The effect is not limited to children or classrooms or even authority figures. It happens every day in every context. It is the way we raise children, the way we lead teams, the way we even love each other. Belief, real, felt, communicated belief, has the power to sculpt potential or to suffocate it at the root. Imagine a child, eyes wide with hope, turning to a teacher for reassurance after a mistake. The difference between "try again, I know you can do it," and "maybe this isn't your strength" is more than words. It is destiny in motion. Multiply that moment by 1,000, by 1,000,000, and you begin to see how entire generations are lifted or stunted by the beliefs of those around them. It is easy to imagine this only in schools, but the truth is far broader. In offices, in families, in the small, everyday interactions that make up a life, the Pygmalion effect is always at work. A boss who expects creativity finds it. A partner who expects failure often gets that too. The world bends, ever so slightly, to meet the hopes and fears we project onto it. There is both power and danger in this knowledge. The power is obvious, the chance to lift others higher, to unlock hidden potential, to build a culture of expectation and growth. The danger is quieter, harder to see. The risk of boxing people in, of suffocating possibility with skepticism or unconscious bias. Every time we decide, in our hearts, who someone else is and what they can become, we take up the sculptor's chisel. What we carve may last a lifetime. So the next time you walk into a room, look at the faces around you and ask, what silent prophecies am I weaving? Am I building someone or breaking them down? The story of the Pygmalion classroom effect is a reminder, urgent, unavoidable, that belief is never neutral. It is an act of creation or destruction, repeated every day. The classroom fades, the experiment ends, but the lesson remains. We are all Pygmalion, whether we want to be or not. The future is built in moments of faith and doubt, of encouragement and dismissal. What you believe about someone matters. It can set them free, or keep them trapped in a story never truly their own. The little Albert fear trap. Picture a quiet laboratory in the early 20th century. The air is thick with the smell of antiseptic and ambition. At the heart of the room sits a baby, barely a year old, gazing at the world with wide, unspoiled eyes. He is known in the annals of psychology as Little Albert, an innocent caught in a web he cannot see, a blank page onto which fear itself would be written. The experiment began as a test of an idea. Is fear something we are born with, or can it be taught? Psychologist John B. Watson, fascinated by the mechanics of the human mind, believed that even the purest emotions could be engineered. And so, in 1920, Little Albert became the unwitting canvas for one of the most disturbing lessons in behavioral science. At first, Albert met the world with gentle curiosity. He played with a white rat, touched soft cotton, reached out for a rabbit. None of these things provoked a single tear. There was no fear in him, only wonder. But the experimenters wanted to see if they could change that. They waited until Albert was distracted by the rat, then struck a metal bar with a hammer behind his head. The sound was sudden, sharp, and terrifying. Albert flinched, startled into tears. They did it again, and again. Every time the rat appeared, the clang of the metal bar followed. In a matter of days, the white rat became a warning siren in Albert's mind. The sight of the animal alone was enough to trigger panic and tears, his body tensing with a fear he could not understand. The experiment had worked. Fear, it turned out, could be manufactured as easily as any habit. Innocence could be rewritten with pain. But the lesson did not end there. The terror that Albert learned was not limited to the white rat. Soon, anything soft and white, rabbits, dogs, even the fur collar of a coat, became objects of dread. The experimenters had discovered something even more haunting. Fear is not only taught, but contagious. It spreads through association, leaping from object to object, growing in the shadows of the mind. The world, once filled with curiosity, now shimmered with threat. The implications ripple through the decades. In that sterile laboratory, a baby learned to fear not just one thing, but many. The experimenters watched, took notes, and proved their point. But Albert was left with something else, a lesson in terror he never asked for, a map of the world now drawn in anxiety. The experiment, lauded at the time for its insight, is now remembered for its cruelty. Little Albert's story is a cautionary tale, a dark mirror reflecting how fragile the foundations of our minds truly are. Why does this story still matter? Because the machinery of fear is still at work in subtler ways in all of us. When a child is startled by a parent's angry shout, when the news blares threats and disasters, when the world outside feels unpredictable and hostile, the lessons learned in Watson's lab echo in every trembling heart. Fear is contagious, picked up amplified, spread from moment to moment, generation to generation. What starts as a startled reaction to a sound can grow into lifelong anxiety, shaping how we see others, ourselves, and the world. The tragedy of little Albert is not just what was done to him, but what it reveals about the nature of innocence. Children are not born afraid of rabbits, darkness, or thunder. Fear, for most of us, is a story we are told by accident or design, etched onto us by circumstance, reinforced by repetition, deepened by association. Sometimes that story is handed down gently, through caution and care. Other times, as in that laboratory, it is hammered in by force, echoing louder with every retelling. Consider how this plays out in everyday life. A child, bitten once by a dog, may jump at every bark for years to come. A student mocked during a presentation may flinch at every classroom spotlight. The roots of adult phobias, anxieties, and self-doubt often trace back to moments like these, seemingly small, but echoing forever. The fear that is implanted does not remain a lesson about one thing. It metastasizes, coloring the world itself. And it doesn't stop at childhood. Adults, too, are conditioned. The threat of punishment, the sound of a slammed door, a news report looping tragedy, all can ignite patterns of fear and avoidance that shape us more than we realize. The story of little Albert is a reminder that the architecture of our minds is built on associations, and that fear is among the most powerful blueprints. We carry it with us, sometimes for a lifetime, rarely understanding its source. But perhaps the deepest tragedy is this. Little Albert's fear was never unlearned. The experiment ended. The scientists moved on, but Albert remained, a child with invisible wounds, his mind permanently shaped by an encounter he could neither name nor escape. He was not taught to overcome his fears. The lesson was never undone. The innocence that was lost in that lab was never given back. In the end, the story of little Albert is a warning and a challenge. It shows us how terrifyingly easy it is to plant fear in a blank mind, and how quickly that fear can take root and spread. It urges us to be gentle with the minds of others, especially the young and innocent. To remember that fear is learned, but so is safety. What we pass on, deliberately or not, shapes the world our children inherit. As you listen to this story, ask yourself, what fears have you inherited? Which ones did you learn, not from truth, but from echoes and accidents? And most importantly, what kind of lessons do you leave behind in the minds of others? In a world that is always ready to strike the metal bar, sometimes the bravest thing we can do is put it down and teach love instead. The over-justification effect. Imagine a child lost in a world of color. She sits by the window, a fistful of crayons, paper stretched before her like a tiny universe waiting to be born. For hours she draws, strange birds, bright skies, stories told in lines and shades. She hums softly, her mind adrift in play, free of time and purpose. There is no audience, no reward, no goal but the joy of creation itself. She draws because she loves it, because, for a moment, her imagination and her hand become one. Now, imagine an adult, watching from the doorway, notebook in hand. He marvels at the child's dedication, her glowing pride as each new picture unfolds. Wanting to encourage her, he makes a decision. If you draw me more pictures, I'll give you a gold star, or a cookie, or even some money. The child's eyes widen. Suddenly, the game has rules. The colors become currency. The joy of creation merges with the lure of reward. She draws more at first. She craves the stars, the cookies, the coins. But something subtle shifts. The humming grows quieter. The drawings become hurried, routine, a means to an end. One day, the rewards are taken away. The paper remains. The crayons are still there. But the child hesitates. She looks at her empty hands, and suddenly, drawing feels like work. This is the over-justification effect, a silent, invisible force that unravels our deepest joys, exposing how easily passion can wither when profit takes